It was a quiet morning in early summer when the mystery first arrived, not in person, but in the crisp rattle of a telegram. My wife and I were having breakfast, sunlight spilling through the curtains, when the maid entered with the small yellow envelope. I unfolded it, expecting perhaps a note from a patient or some dull announcement. Instead, I saw the familiar signature, Sherlock Holmes. Have you a couple of days to spare? Have just been wired for from the west of England in connection with Boscombe Valley tragedy. Shall be glad if you will come with me. Air and scenery perfect. Leave Paddington by the 11:15. I read it aloud. My wife looked up from her tea, smiling softly. Will you go, dear? She asked. I hardly know what to say, I admitted. My list of patients is quite full. Anne Struther can cover your rounds, she insisted. You've looked pale lately. A few days with Mr. Holmes will do you more good than a week of rest. I could not argue. There was something about Holmes, his cold brilliance, his relentless curiosity, that pulled me from my routines like a magnet drawing metal. And she was right. The quiet domestic comfort of London, though pleasant, often left me feeling restless. Within half an hour, my bag was packed, my medical instruments wrapped neatly inside, and I was in a cab rattling toward Paddington Station. Holmes was already there, pacing the platform like a caged hawk, his long gray coat fluttering behind him. His sharp eyes brightened when he saw me. It is really very good of you to come, Watson, he said, shaking my hand warmly. Having someone I can rely upon makes a considerable difference. Local aid is always either worthless or hopelessly biased. I laughed. Then I shall endeavor to be neither. He smiled faintly. Excellent. Keep the 2 corner seats, I'll fetch the tickets. When the train began to move, we had the carriage entirely to ourselves, save for the mountain of newspapers Holmes had brought. He opened them one by one, scanning headlines, scribbling notes, muttering from time to time, then tossing each sheet aside into an untidy heap. For a while I sat silently watching him, the calm, analytical rhythm of his work, strangely hypnotic. At last, when we had passed Reading, he gathered the entire pile, rolled it into a ball, and tossed it into the luggage rack. Have you heard anything of the case? He asked. Not a word. I haven't seen a paper for days. The London press has been frustratingly thin on details, he said. It appears to be one of those simple cases which are so extremely difficult. That sounds paradoxical, I remarked. He smiled. Yet it's true. The simpler a crime appears, the more it resists analysis. Singularity, that is something unusual, is almost always the clue. But a crime that looks entirely ordinary hides its devil in plain sight. I nodded. And what's known so far? Holmes leaned back, lighting a cigarette, his voice taking on that calm, deliberate tone he used when arranging facts like chess pieces. Boscombe Valley, he began, is a quiet country district in Herefordshire. The largest estate belongs to one Mr. John Turner, who made his fortune in Australia before returning to England. A man named Charles McCarthy, also an ex-Australian, rented a farm from him, Hatherley Farm. The 2 men had known each other in the colonies, and when they returned home, they settled close by. Turner was wealthier, McCarthy his tenant, but they were said to be on terms of perfect equality. He paused, gazing out the window. Each had 1 child, Turner, a daughter, McCarthy, a son. Both about 18. Neither had wives living. The families kept to themselves, avoiding the neighboring society, though both men were often seen at races and sporting events. He flicked ash into the tray. Now to the facts. On Monday, June 3rd, McCarthy left Hatherley around 3 in the afternoon to meet someone at Boscombe Pool, a small lake formed by the widening of a local stream. He never returned alive. Holmes's tone darkened slightly as he continued. Two witnesses saw him walking alone, an old woman whose name isn't mentioned, and a gamekeeper named William Crowder who worked for Turner. A few minutes later, Crowder saw McCarthy's son following the same path, gun in hand. Later that afternoon, a young girl named Patience Moran, the lodgekeeper's daughter, reported seeing the two McCarthys near the pool, father and son, in a violent quarrel. The father was shouting, the son raised his hand as if to strike. Frightened, the girl ran home to tell her mother what she'd seen. Moments later, young McCarthy came rushing up to their lodge, hatless, pale, and with blood on his sleeve, saying that his father was dead. Holmes exhaled smoke slowly. The servants followed him to the scene. The body lay on the grass beside the water, the head beaten in by repeated blows from some blunt weapon. The son's gun was found nearby, and he was immediately arrested. The coroner's inquest returned a verdict of willful murder. The evidence seemed overwhelming. I frowned. A dreadful business. Circumstantial evidence can be quite damning. Holmes smiled thinly. Indeed, and profoundly deceptive. You see, circumstantial evidence points very straight until you shift your point of view. Then it points the other way entirely. He opened his notebook. The police are convinced the son is guilty. He quarreled with his father, was seen striking him, returned blood-stained and weaponless. Yet several locals, including Turner's daughter, Miss Alice Turner, are convinced of his innocence. She has even hired our old acquaintance, Inspector Lestrade, to defend him. I raised my eyebrows. Lestrade? Then the case will be interesting if not well managed. Holmes laughed quietly. Lestrade means well, but he sees the world through keyholes. He catches the outline, never the room. I smiled at that. And he's already called for your help. Yes. Which means, Watson, that two middle-aged gentlemen are now flying westward at 50 miles an hour instead of digesting their breakfast quietly at home. I shook my head, amused. The facts sound terribly obvious. You'll find little credit to gain here. Holmes's eyes twinkled. There is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. The countryside flashed past the window fields of bright green small villages with red roofs, church spires rising through the mist. Holmes leaned back and folded his arms, the faintest trace of a smile still on his lips. You know me too well, he said softly. If I cannot prove the son's innocence, I shall at least understand his guilt, not by guessing, but by seeing. And Watson, seeing is an art that every detective and every language learner must master. He looked directly at me, his tone shifting into that patient, mentor-like calm he sometimes used when teaching. Take, for example, our phrase, circumstantial evidence. It means evidence based on indirect facts, what surrounds the event, not what we witness directly. The word circum means around, and stance means to stand. So it is evidence that stands around the truth. Clever, isn't it? But often misleading. I nodded, scribbling it in my notebook. He continued, and another, to take something for granted. It means to accept a fact without proof. Most people take guilt for granted before they've examined motive, time, or means. That's why most investigators fail. He turned back to the window, his voice quiet but firm. In language as in detection, assumptions are the enemy of truth. The train thundered onward. Holmes grew silent again, lost in thought. After several minutes, he said suddenly, "Watson, do you know why I invited you on this case?" I smiled. "Because you needed a reliable companion." "Partly," he said. "But more than that, I needed someone who listens. Most detectives hear only the evidence. You, my friend, hear the people." He smiled faintly and tapped his temple. Observation tells us what happened. Empathy tells us why. As the train curved toward the western hills, sunlight filled the carriage and Holmes closed his eyes, murmuring almost to himself, "Boscombe Valley. A pool, a quarrel, a dying word, a sun in chains." And somewhere in the space between fact and feeling lies the truth. The rhythm of the train became slower, heavier, as we left the city behind. The adventure had begun. The whistle of the train echoed through the green valleys of England as we left London far behind. The clouds broke above the rolling fields, and sunlight danced across the glass panes of our compartment. Holmes sat opposite me, utterly still, his long fingers steepled together and his eyes half closed, not in rest, but in calculation. I had seen that look before. When others daydreamed, Holmes deduced. "Watson," he said suddenly, "have you ever noticed how the human mind behaves like a train journey?" I looked up from my notes. "In what way?" "It gathers speed with facts," he said, "rushes through landscapes of possibility and occasionally stops at the wrong station before realizing its error." He smiled faintly. "My task is simply to know which station is the right one." I laughed softly. "And mine, I suppose, is to buy the tickets." "Quite so," said Holmes. "Now let me lay out the situation clearly before we reach Ross." He unfolded a fresh sheet of paper from his notebook and began sketching quickly a few lines, some trees, a small circle representing the Boscombe pool. "You see," he said, tapping the drawing, "Mr. Charles McCarthy leaves home at 3 in the afternoon. He tells his servant he has an appointment of great importance at this very pool. A few witnesses see him walking alone. Minutes later, his son James follows also alone. A quarrel is witnessed by the lodge-keeper's daughter, and soon after the father lies dead, his head struck by a blunt object, the son's gun nearby." He glanced up. "All appears clear enough, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "Too clear." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Exactly. The clearest facts are the most suspicious. When every detail fits too perfectly, one should always suspect a hand arranging the puzzle." He leaned back, smiling slightly. "That, my dear Watson, is lesson number 1 for any detective or any student of English. Never trust what looks too simple." The train rattled past open meadows. Holmes continued his analysis, his tone calm and methodical. "Young McCarthy is accused because of 3 things: opportunity, anger, and evidence. Opportunity, he was there. Anger, he was seen quarreling. Evidence, blood on his sleeve. His gun found near the body. And yet," he paused, tapping the window with one long finger, "the gun, Watson. Do you notice the problem? It was found near the body, exactly near knot in his hand. A murderer rarely leaves his weapon beside the victim unless he wishes to be discovered. That alone makes me suspicious." I nodded. "Then you think he's innocent?" "I think," said Holmes, "that innocence and guilt are both lazy words. I prefer truth, and that takes work." For a while, we rode in silence. Holmes pulled out a small magnifying glass, examining the corner of one newspaper clipping with such intensity that it seemed as though the print might confess to him. Finally, he said, "I've been studying the coroner's report. The fatal blows came from behind. Now the girls swore the two were facing each other during the quarrel. Tell me, Watson, what does that suggest? That the blow wasn't struck in anger, not face to face." "Excellent," said Holmes. "The killer approached unseen, which raises a new question: who else was near that pool?" He tapped the map again. "The location is isolated. Strangers would be noticed. Whoever struck McCarthy must have been familiar with the area and with McCarthy himself." He closed his notebook and sat back, his gaze softening. "There's something else here. something human. You recall how the son said his father's last word was, "A rat." Yes, doesn't it strike you as odd? Dying words often contain truth disguised by confusion. But perhaps this one is not confusion at all. Suppose it isn't a rat, but part of another word. English, Watson, is a mischievous language. It loves to hide clues inside sounds. I smiled. You mean like hidden vocabulary in the middle of a riddle? Exactly. He leaned forward. Consider this, the McCarthys and Turner both lived in Australia, once near Ballarat, a gold mining town. Now, if McCarthy's last word was not a rat, but Ballarat, then he was not speaking nonsense. He was naming a place, and perhaps the man who killed him. I felt a chill. Then this murderer may be Australian. Holmes nodded. The cooey cry supports it, an Australian call used by miners to signal one another. Two details. Watson point to the same country. Coincidence rarely occurs twice in one story. He smiled faintly. And that, my friend, is how English listening helps detective work. Hear not only what is said, but how it sounds. Holmes leaned back in his seat again, the cigarette smoke swirling around him like fog. "Let me tell you something about words," he said. "A dying man may speak little, but he speaks true. When language shortens to its final breath, every syllable counts. That is why I listen to what people mean, not merely what they say." He flicked the ash from his cigarette and looked toward me with that quiet, instructive calm that always appeared when he was teaching without saying so. Expression number 1 for today. Watson, to read between the lines. It means to find hidden meaning, to understand what is not said directly. Most people only read the words. The detective, however, reads the silences between them. He smiled. And number 2, a blessing in disguise. A phrase for when something that seems bad may later prove good. Perhaps this tragedy will reveal truth, long hidden, a blessing, though wrapped in shadow. I jotted them in my notes. "You're turning our cases into lessons again," I said with a grin. Holmes's eyes softened. "Everything is a lesson if one knows how to learn." By the time the train slowed at Swindon for lunch, the countryside had opened wide and bright before us. Holmes stretched his long arms, his coat falling in soft folds. Ah, fresh air and green hills. England looks innocent enough, does it not? Yet beneath every quiet field lies a human secret waiting to be uncovered. We descended to the platform, and Holmes ordered coffee, but touched no food. His mind was already elsewhere, running ahead of the train, tracing invisible footsteps along the muddy banks of Boscombe Pool. As we climbed back into the carriage, he said suddenly, "You know, Watson, people call me a man of logic, but sometimes I think I am merely a student of motives. And motives, like English words, have roots. They grow from emotion." He smiled faintly as the train began to move again. "I suspect that when we reach Ross, we shall find this crime grew from something far older than hatred, something buried deep in memory." The countryside darkened again, and the rhythm of the train carried us toward the west, toward a mystery that waited beside a still pool, and a truth that whispered from a dying man's final breath. By the time our train pulled into the small, quiet town of Ross, the golden afternoon light had softened to a mellow hue. The fields shimmered beyond the station, and the faint scent of hay drifted through the open windows. Waiting on the platform was a thin man in a brown dust coat and leather leggings, standing with his hands clasped neatly behind his back. Holmes's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Ah, Lestrade," he murmured. Even in the countryside, he looks as if he's standing in court. The inspector's narrow face broke into a polite grin as he saw us. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson, I expected you by this train. The carriage is waiting." As we rode through the streets toward the Hereford Arms, Lestrade spoke briskly, as though reading from a prepared report. "The case is plain as a pikestaff. The father and son quarreled. The son's gun was found near the body. The girl's testimony confirms it. There's motive, means, and opportunity. I dare say, Mr. Holmes, this will be a short trip for you." Holmes leaned back against the seat, his voice quiet. "Lestrade, my dear fellow, you remind me of the dictionary." "The dictionary," Lestrade frowned. "Yes. You contain all the words, but none of the meaning." I smothered a laugh as Holmes turned to gaze out the window, watching the green hedgerows drift by. At the inn, after tea was served, Lestrade rose briskly. "I knew your energetic nature, Holmes. I've already ordered a carriage for you to visit the crime scene. But before that, there's someone rather insistent to see you." He glanced toward the window just as the sound of carriage wheels clattered outside. The door burst open, and a young woman swept into the room, her cheeks flushed from the wind, her violet eyes wide with determination. "Mr. Holmes," she cried, spotting him instantly. "Oh, thank God you've come." Holmes stood at once and bowed slightly. "Miss Turner, I presume?" "Yes, Alice Turner," she said breathlessly. "I drove down to tell you that I know James McCarthy didn't do it. I know it. Please, Mr. Holmes, promise me you'll begin your work believing in his innocence." Holmes's expression softened. "You may rely on me, Miss Turner. I always begin with doubt, and doubt includes the possibility of innocence. But you've read the report," she insisted. "You've seen what they say. Surely you must already see the flaw, the something that proves he's innocent." Holmes's eyes studied her face for a moment, the tremble in her voice, the way her hands twisted her gloves. Then he said gently, "I think it is very probable that he is innocent." She gave a cry of relief and turned to Lestrade. "You see, even he believes it." Lestrade sighed. "Mr. Holmes forms his conclusions too quickly, Miss Turner. The evidence lies," she interrupted. "James is no killer. He has his faults, I know them well, but cruelty isn't one." Holmes tilted his head slightly. "You and Mr. McCarthy have known each other long, since we were children," she said. "Our families were always close. But Mr. McCarthy, the elder one, he wanted us to marry. James and I." She hesitated, blushing. "We love each other dearly, but we were not ready. My father was against it, and so was James's father when he saw James hesitate. That is why they quarreled." "Ah," said Holmes softly. "So the quarrel had a woman's name in it after all." She lowered her gaze. "I believe so. Mr. McCarthy spoke cruelly. James could not bear it. But even then, he would never have hurt him." Holmes regarded her with that curious blend of warmth and precision that only he possessed, the sympathy of a man who understands pain, tempered by the logic of one who studies it. "You've been very brave, Miss Turner," he said quietly. "One more question, if I may. Your father, is he well enough to see visitors?" Her expression clouded. "I'm afraid not. He's been in poor health for years, but this affair has broken him completely. Dr. Willows says his nerves are shattered. He hardly leaves his bed." Holmes's eyes flickered. "And Mr. McCarthy, the deceased, was your father's old friend from Victoria?" "Yes, from the gold mines," she replied. "They knew each other before they came home to England." Holmes leaned forward slightly. "Victoria? Of course. Australia again." He smiled faintly. "Thank you, Miss Turner. You've given me precisely what I needed." "Then you'll help him?" she asked earnestly. "I will do everything in my power." And I think he added, glancing toward Lestrade, that power extends a little further than the official imagination of Scotland Yard. As Miss Turner left her carriage rattling away into the distance, Holmes stood silent for a long time, staring into the empty teacup in his hand. The room grew quiet, except for the tick of the clock. Lestrade broke the silence. "You shouldn't raise her hopes, Holmes. It's cruel to give people faith when the facts are against them." Holmes turned toward him sharply, his expression unreadable. "Cruel Lestrade? No. What's cruel is condemning a man before understanding the story he never told. That's something Englishmen and English speakers often forget." Lestrade frowned. "What do you mean by that?" Holmes looked at me. "Watson, tell our friend what it means to judge a book by its cover." I smiled. "It's an idiom, Lestrade. It means to make assumptions from appearances to think you know the truth because you've only looked at the surface." Holmes nodded. "Precisely. You see, Lestrade, both in language and in law, people rush to conclusions because the outer form seems so obvious. But truth, like grammar, is often hidden in the fine print." Lestrade only shook his head. "You can turn anything into a lecture, can't you?" Holmes smiled. "Only when the student insists on learning." That night, Holmes sat by the fire in our small hotel room, the flickering light reflecting on his thin face. I watched him fill his pipe, tamping the tobacco with absent care. "Watson," he said after a while, "do you remember Miss Turner's words? He was urging his son to marry my daughter." "Yes, there's something curious in that sentence. Urging, not suggesting. It was not a conversation, it was pressure. Why would a man be so desperate to force his son into marriage unless—" He trailed off, the smoke curling around his face like thought made visible. "Unless there's a debt to be paid or a secret to be kept." I leaned forward. "You think the motive lies in the past? Where else should it lie?" he murmured. "All crimes are simply the past refusing to stay buried." He rose suddenly, as if the fire had whispered something only he could hear. "Tomorrow we visit the scene. But tonight, Watson, listen to this phrase, our third for the day, a blessing in disguise. Perhaps this young man's misfortune will reveal a truth, long hidden one that has poisoned 2 generations." He turned toward the window, the outline of his face sharp against the fading glow of the lamps. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we follow the footprints that lead backward into memory." The room fell silent except for the quiet crackle of the fire, and I knew that once again Sherlock Holmes had already begun his hunt, not merely for a criminal, but for a story buried in human hearts. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with the faint mist of early summer still clinging to the valley. Birds stirred in the hedgerows as we left the inn in Lestrade's carriage bound for Boscombe Pool, the scene of the tragedy. Holmes sat beside me, silent but alert, his sharp eyes following every turn of the road. When the carriage halted at the edge of a dense copse, he stepped out, lightly sniffed the air, and looked around as if greeting an old friend. "Ah, the countryside," he murmured. "Nature is a better witness than any man, Watson. She records everything but only tells her secrets to those who ask correctly." The path sloped downward through trees to a small clearing. Ahead, the pool shimmered, a wide oval of water, dark at its center, fringed with reeds and willows. The scene was peaceful now, but the stillness carried a weight, as though the air itself remembered violence. Lestrade pointed with his walking stick. "That's where the body was found, by those bushes on the right. And there, about 5 paces away, is where the gun lay." Holmes glanced at the spot, then immediately turned his back on it. "Lestrade," he said calmly, "you always rush to where the drama happened. The wiser man begins where it did not happen." He began to walk in slow, deliberate circles, scanning the ground, stopping now and then to kneel. I watched him with fascination. It was as though every broken twig and blade of grass whispered a story only he could hear. After several minutes, Holmes called me over. "Observe, Watson. What do you see here?" I bent down. "Footprints, several of them." "Describe them." "Well, one set seems lighter, smaller, perhaps the girl's. The other deeper with a longer stride. A man's." "Good. Now look again." I squinted. "Wait." This heavier set turns back toward the trees. Holmes smiled faintly. "Exactly. Someone was watching. Someone who stood here unseen while father and son argued by the water." Lestrade frowned. "That could have been any local, a poacher, perhaps." Holmes shook his head. "No poacher stands still for 10 minutes without reason. Look at the impressions, evenly spaced, undisturbed. He waited, not hid. He was not afraid of being seen." Holmes straightened, dusting his knees. "And now the second lesson of the day, Watson. Details never shout, they whisper. The louder the witness, the less they know. The truth speaks softly from the ground." He walked toward the pool. "Now then, what do we know of the weapon?" Lestrade replied, "No weapon was found save the gun." Holmes crouched by the grass, studying a flattened patch near the water's edge. And yet he murmured the wounds were blunt, not caused by a gun barrel. The earth here was pressed down by something heavier, broader. Something like the butt of a hunting stick, perhaps. He traced a faint line in the mud. "And this, see how it drags slightly toward the reeds." The murderer dropped something heavy, then picked it up again. "Curious." Lestrade folded his arms impatiently. "You're seeing ghosts in mud, Holmes." The man's own son admitted quarreling with him. "Yes," Holmes said quietly. "And if quarreling were a crime, half of England would be in prison." He turned toward the water, gazing across its calm surface. "Tell me, Lestrade, when you question the boy, does he mention his father's last words?" "Yes. He claims the old man said a rat. Probably delirious." "Perhaps," said Holmes, "but let us not forget that English spelling can be a murderer's best disguise. What sounds like a rat may in truth begin with Ballarat. And that, gentlemen, is not delirium, it's geography." Holmes began pacing again, lost in thought. I followed him up the slope as the sunlight filtered through the trees. Suddenly, he knelt beside a large oak. "Here, Watson, look. The bark's been torn by something metallic." I bent closer. A spur mark, just so. And here, fresh hoof prints leading away toward the road. He stood, his eyes glinting. Our watcher was mounted. He stood here holding his horse, and when McCarthy fell, he rode off. But not fast. The tracks are shallow. A confident man, not a fugitive. Lestrade frowned. "You think someone else killed him and left the boy to take the blame?" Holmes smiled slightly. "I think, Lestrade, that nature just told us she saw 3 people here that afternoon, not 2, and only one of them left on horseback." He turned to me, his voice dropping to a low, instructive tone. "Watson, make a note. This phrase will serve you well. The devil is in the details. It means that small things often hide the most important truth. The careless observer misses them and loses the case." I jotted it down. "And yet you see details in every blade of grass." He gave a short laugh. "My dear fellow, that's simply practice. The eye-like language improves by habit. Observe enough and the world begins to confess." By noon, the investigation was complete. Holmes had filled 3 pages in his notebook with sketches and notes. Lestrade seemed restless, glancing at his watch. "Well, Holmes," he said, "finally have you found your phantom horseman?" "I have found," said Holmes, "the only witness who cannot lie, and she stands beneath our feet." He glanced at the pool one last time. "There is one thing more." McCarthy's last gesture, according to his son, was to raise his hand as if pointing, but pointing where I wonder, not toward his son who stood before him, but toward the slope where the horse stood waiting. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Watson, the dead can still direct us if we have the courtesy to look where they point. As we walked back to the carriage, the countryside glowed golden under the midday sun. Holmes remained silent, deep in thought, until we reached the lane. Finally, he said, "Watson, language and footprints are much alike. Both record intention. Both reveal when a man changes direction." He glanced at me with a faint smile. "And that, my friend, is why English idioms and human motives are equally fascinating. Consider this one: to cover one's tracks. It means to hide evidence of wrongdoing, whether by wiping footprints or changing words. Our murderer has done both." I nodded, closing my notebook. "Then you believe he's still close?" Holmes looked out toward the quiet valley. "Closer than anyone imagines. And the earth remembers him well." The carriage wheels turned, and as we left the pool behind, the reflection of the trees trembled on the water, peaceful again, but only on the surface. Beneath, the truth was beginning to stir. That afternoon, the air grew heavy with the scent of rain. Dark clouds gathered above the small market town of Ross, and the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the hills as Holmes and I made our way to the local jail. Inside, the constable led us down a narrow corridor lit by flickering lamps. The walls smelled faintly of damp stone and iron. Behind one barred door sat James McCarthy, the accused. He was no more than 22, tall and pale, with honest gray eyes that looked more bewildered than defiant. When he rose to greet us, the clank of his chains echoed softly. Holmes inclined his head. "Mr. McCarthy, my name is Sherlock Holmes. I am here to learn what really happened that afternoon at Boscombe Pool." The young man nodded wearily. "God bless you, sir. I've said all I can say, but no one believes me." Holmes's tone was calm, almost gentle. "Then tell me again. This time, imagine that every word you speak is a footprint. Step carefully, and I shall follow." James sank back onto the wooden bench, his hands clasped tightly together. I'd gone after my father because I'd seen him heading for the pool, and I knew he wanted to talk about Miss Turner again. He'd been pressing me for months to marry her. She's the best and kindest woman alive, but I couldn't agree. I didn't want to trap her in a loveless marriage. Holmes nodded slightly. A wise hesitation, though a dangerous one. "Go on." We met by the water. I told him once and for all that I wouldn't do it. He grew angry, shouted that I was throwing away the best fortune of my life, that her father wanted it settled immediately. I lost my temper, I'm ashamed to say. We quarreled, and I turned to walk away. Then I heard him cry out a sort of choking sound. When I turned back, he was on the ground. His voice trembled. I ran to him, lifted his head, and there was blood. So much blood. I tried to help him, but he was dying. He looked at me as if he wanted to speak. The only words I could make out were, "a rat." Then he went still. Holmes leaned forward, eyes sharp, but voice steady. "And no one else was there?" "No, sir. At least I saw no one. But I swear to you, as God is my witness, I didn't kill him." Holmes studied him in silence for several seconds, then said quietly, "Your story has the ring of truth. Still, I must ask, why did the girl, Patience Moran, say she saw you raise your hand as if striking him?" James flushed. "I suppose it looked that way. I did lift my hand, but only in anger before I walked off. I never touched him. If I had, I'd have admitted it. I'm no coward." Holmes nodded slowly. "Good. And the blood on your sleeve?" I must have got it when I lifted his head. I didn't even notice until later. Holmes tapped his fingers together thoughtfully. Now, one more question. You love Miss Turner? The young man hesitated. More than my life. But I've never told her so, not plainly. Holmes smiled faintly. She already knows. James looked up in astonishment. She does, yes. And more than that, she believes in you. Do you know how rare that is in this world, Mr. McCarthy? To be believed without proof. The prisoner's voice broke. She's an angel, sir. If I could see her just once, I'd die happy. Holmes's eyes softened, but his tone remained measured. You may see her sooner than you think, provided justice can tell its left hand from its right. Outside the cell, as the door clanged shut behind us, Lestrade cleared his throat. Well, what do you make of him, Holmes? Holmes lit his pipe slowly before answering. I make of him what I make of most prisoners, an honest man who has been trapped by appearances. Lestrade snorted. He's nervous, contradictory, emotional. Which proves nothing, Holmes interrupted. When you put an innocent man in chains, he begins to act exactly as a guilty one would. Lestrade frowned. Then you really think he's telling the truth? Holmes blew a slow ring of smoke. My dear Lestrade, truth doesn't depend on belief. It depends on consistency. And his story, every phrase of it, fits the landscape at Boscombe Pool. He turned to me suddenly. Watson, do you recall the footprints we found by the oak? Yes, the third set, exactly. They were older than McCarthy's death by perhaps a few hours. The soil had dried slightly around them. That tells us our unseen visitor was there before the quarrel, waiting. Lestrade raised an eyebrow. You mean it was premeditated? Holmes's eyes gleamed. I mean it was inevitable. We stepped out into the damp evening air. The clouds had broken and a light rain was falling, gentle and rhythmic. Holmes paused beneath a street lamp, watching the drops gather on the brim of his hat. Watson, he said softly, language has its own rain words that fall quietly but leave deep marks. Consider our phrase for today, to twist someone's arm. It means to force a person into doing something against his will. That is precisely what happened here. The elder McCarthy was twisting his son's arm emotionally, perhaps financially, and someone decided to twist fate itself to end it. I nodded. So you believe there was a hidden hand in all this? Someone beyond the father and son? Holmes gave a faint smile. Every tragedy has a third character, Watson. The visible two are only the actors. We walked back to the inn in silence. The town lay quiet, the lamps glowing through the mist. Inside, Holmes sat by the fire pipe in hand and stared into the flames as though they were whispering secrets. After some time, he said, "There's one word in all this that bothers me, Ballarat. It connects two men, McCarthy and Turner. Both lived there. Both returned rich. And now one lies dead, and the other dying." He looked at me steadily. When two men share a past in golden blood, they usually bring back something heavier than coins. I watched the firelight flicker in his eyes. Then this isn't about the son at all. No, Holmes said quietly. It's about what the father carried home from Australia and what someone else could not forget. He leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. Tomorrow, Watson, we call upon Mr. John Turner. And if I'm not mistaken, that visit will bring us face to face with the ghost of Ballarat. The following morning broke clear and still the kind of calm that often comes before revelation. Holmes was already awake when I rose, standing by the window with his coat half buttoned and his eyes distant, as though he were watching not the street outside, but a memory unfolding beyond it. "Watson," he said quietly, "the barometer has fallen 3 degrees since yesterday. Storms are brewing in the sky and in Boscombe Valley alike. Within the hour, we were again in Lestrade's carriage, rumbling along the narrow country road toward Hatherley Farm and the grand estate of Mr. John Turner. The inspector seemed more confident than ever, his tone brisk and satisfied. "There's no mystery left, Mr. Holmes," he said. "Young McCarthy killed his father. Every clue fits neatly." Holmes smiled thinly. A neat clue, Lestrade, is often like a perfectly written essay, too polished to be true. Hatherley Farm stood quiet beneath the morning sun. The blinds were drawn, the chimneys cold. Holmes asked to see the boots of both father and son. The maid, pale and nervous, fetched them without a word. He laid them side by side upon the table, measuring carefully with a tape. "Observe, Watson," he said. "The elder McCarthy's soles are smooth, a man who walks evenly. But the son's right heel is worn inward, suggesting a heavier tread. These details confirm the two sets of prints we saw yesterday." He straightened up, eyes sharp. "Now let us visit the pool once more." The air near the water was still, except for the soft hum of insects. Holmes walked ahead, his coat brushing the reeds, Lestrade following behind with an air of forced patience. Once more, Holmes stopped by the great oak where the third set of footprints had been found. This time he examined not the ground, but the trunk. With the small lens he always carried, he peered closely at the bark. "Watson, here. See these faint scratches, vertical, about 6 inches apart." I leaned closer. "Claw marks." "Not quite. Metal, the edge of a spur, perhaps. And these ashes beneath the root, cigar ash. Thick brown of the Indian variety, rolled in Rotterdam." He pocketed a small sample in an envelope. Our invisible observer was not only watching, he was smoking calmly, like a man waiting for an appointment. Lestrade groaned. "Really, Holmes, every Englishman smokes." Holmes smiled faintly. "True, but not every Englishman smokes Indian cigars while wearing a gray cloak and leaning on a stick with a blunt metal ferrule." "Shall I go on?" Lestrade flushed, muttering, "You'll be saying next that he limped." Holmes turned toward him sharply. "Indeed I shall. The right footprint is always lighter, the heel mark shallower. Our man carried his weight unevenly, a limp slight but habitual. We followed the tracks through the undergrowth until they vanished at the main road. There, Holmes stopped, hands behind his back, lost in thought. "Watson," he said softly, "we have reached a fork, both in the road and in logic. If our analysis holds, the killer was not a stranger, but a man known to McCarthy. He came here by horse, stood behind the oak, watched the quarrel, and acted when opportunity arose." Lestrade shrugged. "Or the son could have gone back, taken a horse." "Impossible," Holmes cut in. "The horse's prints predate the murder by an hour, and the saddle marks show the rider dismounted here, then led the animal quietly into the wood. That is not panic, Lestrade, that is patience." He took a deep breath. "Come, it's time to visit Turner Hall." The Turner estate was vast, its drive lined with beeches and its windows shuttered against the light. A nurse met us at the door, her face grave. "Mr. Turner is ill, gentlemen. His doctor has forbidden visitors." Holmes handed her a folded note. "Then give him this. It contains a single question that only he can answer." She hesitated, then disappeared upstairs. 10 minutes later, she returned. "Mr. Turner says he will see you." "Alone." Holmes glanced at us. "Watson, you will accompany me. Lestrade, wait here. This conversation requires listening, not interruption." We followed the nurse into a dim room. Curtains were drawn against the daylight, and the air smelled faintly of medicine and old wood. On a couch near the window lay John Turner, the once powerful landowner, now wasted by illness. His hair was white, his face sunken, but his eyes still burned with a strange, haunted strength. "You wish to see me, Mr. Holmes," he said hoarsely. "I assume it is about McCarthy." Holmes inclined his head. "It is." "I will be direct, sir. You were with him that day at Boscombe Pool." Turner's hands trembled slightly on the blanket. "I was not." "Spare yourself the lie," Holmes interrupted gently. "You stood behind the oak. You listened to his words. You waited until the quarrel ended, and then you struck him down." The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock. Then Turner gave a long, weary sigh. "So you know." "I know enough to understand," Holmes said quietly, "but I would hear it from you." Turner sank back, covering his face with his hand. "I did it," he said at last. "God help me, I did it." Holmes spoke softly. "Tell us why." The old man's voice trembled, but each word carried the weight of years. "Because 20 years ago in Victoria, I was another man, a criminal. They called me Black Jack of Ballarat. McCarthy was part of it, our gang. We robbed convoys, killed men for gold. I escaped, came here, bought this land, swore to live clean. But he found me. He came to England with his son and began his blackmail." He closed his eyes. "For 20 years he's taken everything from me, money, land, peace. And then when he demanded my daughter for his son, that was the end. I waited for him at the pool. When I heard him talk about Alice as if she were property, his voice broke. I struck him. I would do it again." Holmes remained still for a moment, then said quietly, "You have sinned, sir, but I do not think the gallows should claim what sickness already will." Turner looked up, tears glinting in his sunken eyes. "You'll let the boy go. I will keep your confession sealed," said Holmes. "If young McCarthy is condemned, I shall reveal it to save him. If not, it will never leave this room." The old man's head bowed. "Then may God reward you. You've given me peace at last." As we stepped outside, Holmes paused on the veranda, drawing a deep breath. The air was thick with the scent of wet grass. "Watson," he said softly, "our English lesson for today, to bury the hatchet. It means to make peace, to end conflict. But you see, in some hearts, the hatchet was never buried. It merely waited hidden until the past came knocking again." I looked back at the house. "And now," Holmes murmured, "the truth sleeps. And sometimes that is mercy." The rain began to fall in earnest as we walked down the drive, each drop sounding like the echo of an old crime washing itself clean. The rain had deepened into a steady whisper against the carriage roof as Holmes and I rode back toward the town. Lestrade sat across from us, restless, tapping his fingers against his knee. The rhythmic sound blended with the rain until Holmes spoke at last, his voice low but edged with finality. "The case is finished." Lestrade blinked. "Finished. We've no warrant, no statement, and the only suspect we can touch is the one behind bars." Holmes looked out the window where mist curled over the fields like smoke. "You are correct, Lestrade, and yet justice has already been served, though not the kind that wears a wig and robe." He turned toward him. "James McCarthy will be released. See to it." The inspector frowned. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," Holmes replied quietly, "that truth and law are not always the same species. One grows wild, the other is cultivated, and sometimes they don't share the same soil." Back at the inn, the lamps were being lit. Holmes dismissed Lestrade with a curt nod and asked the innkeeper for writing paper. When we were alone, he said to me, "Watson, I must write a statement of confession, though not my own. Turner is dying. His word must survive him, even if sealed." He began to write quickly, his long fingers moving steadily across the page. The only sound was the scratch of the pen and the faint hiss of the fire. When he finished, he folded the sheets neatly and placed them inside an envelope marked, "For Mr. Turner to be opened only if necessary." He leaned back, lighting his pipe. There, the old man's story is safe, and the boy's life, I think, is his again. I watched the smoke drift upward. "Holmes," I said after a pause, "do you ever feel pity for those who cross the line not out of greed but desperation?" Holmes's eyes softened. "My dear Watson, I feel pity for everyone who carries a secret heavier than his conscience can bear. Mr. Turner was both villain and victim. We are all, in some way, both." He exhaled slowly. And that brings us to today's phrase, a skeleton in the closet. It means a dark secret from the past, something hidden out of shame. Turner's skeleton walked beside him for 20 years. It whispered through his sleepless nights until he finally turned to face it. I nodded thoughtfully. "And what about the son? Will he ever learn the truth?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not from me. Some ghosts deserve their rest. If young McCarthy and Miss Turner marry, they will do so without knowing that their father's sins once chained them together. Let them build something new, not out of gold, but grace." The next morning dawned pale and clean. Holmes received a short note from Lestrade: McCarthy acquitted. Jury unconvinced. Leaving Ross today. Holmes read it, smiled slightly, and set it aside. "There, Watson. Our work has left one man free, another at peace, and Scotland Yard none the wiser." "You don't plan to reveal the confession?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. The law is meant to punish the living. Turner is already halfway into the grave. Let him die quietly." He rose and went to the window, looking out at the morning light. "It's strange, isn't it, Watson? We spend our lives chasing truth, yet sometimes the most merciful act is to stop running." We spent that afternoon walking through the valley one last time. The rain had washed everything clean, the leaves shone, and the water in Boscombe pool reflected the sky like a mirror. Holmes stopped by the oak where the murder had occurred. For a moment he simply stood there listening. Then he spoke softly. "Here's where justice met mercy. The earth has forgotten the blood, but not the lesson." He bent to pick up a small weathered stone, the same kind that had been used as the weapon. Turning it in his hand, he said, "This rock ended a life, yet it also freed 2 others. Strange economy, isn't it?" He tossed it gently into the pool. The ripples spread outward wider and wider until they reached the edge and disappeared. That, he murmured, is what truth does when released. It disturbs everything for a moment, and then the surface smooths again. As we walked back toward the carriage, Holmes fell silent, his expression distant. Only when we reached the gate did he speak again in the tone of a teacher closing his lesson. "Watson, remember this phrase, 'Let sleeping dogs lie.' It means sometimes it is wiser not to stir the past, for when you do it may bite. We have let this one lie, and rightly so." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is the real detective's task, not only to reveal, but to decide when not to reveal." The road stretched before us, sunlight breaking through the clouds. The case of Boscombe Valley was behind us, but its echo lingered, a reminder that not all mysteries end with handcuffs, and not all sins demand confession. As our carriage rolled away, Holmes leaned back, closed his eyes, and said quietly, "One more life set straight. That is enough for today." The following evening, the valley seemed reborn. The rains had passed, leaving every leaf washed clean, every blade of grass shimmering like glass beneath the sun. From our window at the inn, I could see the meadows stretching toward the distant woodlands, the very place where blood had once stained the soil. Holmes stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The smoke from his pipe curled upward, dissolving into the golden air. "It is curious, Watson," he said quietly, "how swiftly tragedy turns invisible. Yesterday, this valley whispered of death. Today, it hums again with lifebirds, cattle, children laughing by the hedges. The world forgets faster than it forgives." He turned slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "But not the human heart. It remembers everything, even when it pretends not to." A knock sounded at the door. It was the postboy carrying 2 letters, one addressed to Holmes, the other to me. Holmes slit his open first, his sharp eyes scanning the lines. "Ah, Lestrade writes from London. Case closed. Public satisfied. Jury doubtful but unconvinced. No further inquiry." He handed it to me. "As expected. Scotland Yard will call it luck and move on." I opened my own letter and read slowly. It was from Alice Turner. Her handwriting was elegant, steady. "Dear Dr. Watson, Mr. Holmes has not replied to my note, and so I write to you. James has been released. The doctors say my father will not last the month, but he is at peace. I know not why, but something in his eyes tells me he has been forgiven. I thank you both for saving the innocent and for showing mercy to the guilty. Yours sincerely, Alice Turner." I folded the paper carefully, feeling a quiet ache behind my ribs. She knows Holmes. Not everything, but enough to live without hatred. Holmes nodded. "Then she's wiser than most. Forgiveness is a kind of intelligence, Watson, rarer than logic and far more difficult to learn." We left Ross that afternoon. The road wound through fields of wildflowers, past farms where smoke curled lazily from chimneys. Holmes was unusually quiet, his hat tilted low, his face unreadable. At last I said, "You're thinking of Turner, aren't you?" He gave a faint smile. "I was thinking of the word justice. How men define it in courts, and I define it in silence." He tapped the side of the carriage window. "We English pride ourselves on our love of truth, yet truth without mercy is merely cruelty in formal dress." He looked at me suddenly. "Our phrase today, Watson, to draw the line. It means to decide where something must stop. I drew the line yesterday between punishment and compassion. I will not regret it." That night in London, once more, Holmes and I sat by the fire in Baker Street. The lamps flickered softly. Outside, the city murmured carriages, footsteps, the distant toll of bells. Holmes reclined in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Do you remember," he asked, "the moment we first read that telegram? Have just been wired for from the west of England in connection with Boscombe Valley tragedy." I smiled faintly. "You looked as though someone had handed you a riddle carved in stone." He chuckled. "And now the riddle is solved not by science, but by sorrow. Strange how the human heart can teach what logic alone cannot." He leaned forward. "Watson, every language learner studies grammar, but few study grace. Mercy, too, has syntax. You give it, and the sentence softens." I raised my glass. "Then may we keep learning, old friend." Holmes smiled, and for the first time that night, his voice lost its edge. "Indeed, Watson. For the finest detectives and the finest minds never stop learning. About crime, about people, and about the small mercies that hold the world together." The fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the walls. Holmes stood and drew the curtains, leaving only the orange glow of the embers. Outside, the rain began again, soft, almost musical, like a memory returning to earth. Holmes turned toward me, his expression unreadable, and said simply, Sleep well, Watson. Tomorrow will bring another telegram, and another story that will ask us not merely what happened but why. I watched him move to his violin, tuning it with quiet precision. Then the first notes rose gentle and searching, filling the room with a melancholy peace. And so ended the case of Boscombe Valley, not with triumph nor with tragedy, but with understanding. Because in the end, every mystery, whether of crime or conscience, seeks not a verdict but a listener.